Virginia State Police have made several arrests already, moving to break things up after the city declared the gathering an unlawful assembly. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe has declared a state of emergency in that area, and today's trouble comes after a night of violence on Friday as hundreds of white supremacists marched to the University of Virginia campus carrying tiki torches and shouting slogans like "White Lives Matter" and "Jews will not replace us." Police came in to break things up after fights started between demonstrators and counter-protesters. I want to get to Kaylee Harting. She's now joining us from Charlottesville. She was there for the whole thing. Kaylee, what's happening where you are now?
Well, Boris, police, with the support of the National Guard, have cleared Emancipation Park, formerly known as Lee Park, where Confederate General Robert E. Lee's statue stands, the center of the controversy here. Now, the police have pushed protesters down either end of Market Street. We're hearing of them gathering in other places throughout this town, but that decision to declare a state of emergency by the governor and to declare this gathering an unlawful assembly came after the violence we saw. Protesters on both sides spraying each other with pepper spray. There were smoke bombs. There were water bottles being thrown, flags with the poles being used as weapons. A really, at times, incredibly tense and violent demonstration today, Boris. This comes on the heels of a debate that is happening across the country. What place do Confederate monuments have in today's world? But Charlottesville has become a hotbed for this discussion. This is the third demonstration of its kind that Charlottesville has seen this summer as the City Council has voted to remove that statue of General Lee. But this one different because of the violence you saw, because of the sheer numbers of people that turned out today on both sides. Now, there in previous rallies, you would see counter-protesters outnumbering protesters. That didn't seem to be the case today. Thousands on hand here and still marching through the streets of Virginia carrying their respective messages. And Boris, as the governor, Terry McAuliffe, declared a state of emergency here, he tweeted, "The acts and rhetoric in Charlottesville over the past 24 hours are unacceptable and must stop." We've learned that all scheduled events on the University of Virginia campus have been canceled, as well as police try now to keep the peace on a very tense day in Charlottesville.
All right, Kaylee, thank you. In a bit of an odd twist, the First Lady is responding to violence in Charlottesville. Odd because she isn't exactly an elected official, and she's the first voice that we've heard responding to this chaos from the White House. She sent out a tweet just moments ago. CNN's Athena Jones is in Bedminster, New Jersey, where the president is on a working vacation. Athena, the First Lady typically doesn't get involved in politics, but she is, again, the first voice commenting on these events in Virginia. What does she have to say?
Hi, Boris. Well, this is what First Lady Melania Trump tweeted just a short while ago. She said, "Our country encourages freedom of speech, but let's communicate without hate in our hearts. No good comes from violence. Hashtag Charlottesville." But Boris, as you mentioned, I think we cannot stress enough how unusual it is to have the First Lady be the first White House official to comment publicly on this. We've seen violence not just this morning, but also last night, and yet we have not heard from the president himself. We have not heard from the vice president, and we also haven't heard from Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Those are just some of the high-level officials you would expect to hear respond to this sort of violence. Traditionally, you've seen a president weigh in to try to calm tensions, to try to be, if you want, you could say consoler in chief. We've seen President Trump be campaigner in chief, holding various rallies. We've seen him take quite seriously the role of commander in chief, speaking out several times this past week about the tensions with North Korea, and also yesterday about what's going on in Venezuela. We have yet to see him play the role of consoler in chief. I and several of my colleagues have, of course, reached out to multiple White House officials looking for a response on this. Now, we do expect to see the president at 3 p.m., so just about a couple of hours from now, when he signs a bill at his Bedminster Golf Club. We expect the journalists there covering that event to be able to ask him questions about this, and so we could still hear some response. But remember, Boris, this is a president who tweets often and who watches a lot of cable television. These scenes, these violent demonstrations, these skirmishes have been on TV for the last several hours, and we have yet to hear him or see him comment on Twitter, and that is very, very unusual.
Yeah, but Athena, we have heard from some other lawmakers. What did they tweet out?
Well, we've heard from multiple other officials, including House Speaker Paul Ryan, who tweeted a little while ago, the views fueling the spectacle in Charlottesville are repugnant. Let it only serve to unite Americans against this kind of vile bigotry. So in a similar tone to what we heard from the First Lady, we also heard from the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, Ronna Romney McDaniel, putting out a couple of tweets some time ago talking about how the hate and bigotry on display in Charlottesville is dangerous and cowardly. Free speech gives them the right to do this, but also empowers us to unite to loudly speak against it. Well, we'd like to hear, many people would like to hear the president loudly speaking against this, and that is what we're awaiting. We know that during the campaign, candidate Trump got a lot of support from the alt-right leaders. He was in fact endorsed by David Duke, a former Ku Klux Klan member, and we heard him disavow these groups in an interview soon after being elected with the New York Times, saying he doesn't want to energize this sort of activity. We still, though, have yet to hear him speak out today, and that is what we are eagerly awaiting. Forrest?
All right, Athena, we will keep our eyes peeled for when we get a response from the president himself. Thank you so much, Athena. We should tell you the National Guard is on the scene in Charlottesville, Virginia. We want to bring in Cedric Layton. He's joining us now. Sir, thanks so much for the time. What can the National Guard do to help calm the situation there?
Well, you bet, Boris. One of the big things the National Guard can do is they can augment the police forces. We already know the Virginia State Police are there, local sheriff's deputies, as well as Charlottesville Police. So what the National Guard does is it basically serves to emphasize the governor's intent to not only keep the peace, but enforce the peace. And what they do is they begin to switch roles from a military organization to a law enforcement agency along the lines of the state police, but their powers of arrest are limited in a case like this. So what they can really help with is keeping the crowds under control, doing things like providing logistical support to other law enforcement agencies, and they can also provide logistical support and medical support should law enforcement agencies and other personnel actually be injured in these protests.
Now, to be clear, sir, you're a military analyst for CNN, a retired Air Force colonel. But when you look at what's happening there, what's your take on it as just an American?
Well, as an American, I'm saddened by these kinds of events because the military is an institution, of course, that I grew up in. It is an institution that really exemplifies the best traditions of Americans from all parts of the country. And one of the big successes of the military has been to integrate its forces. Events like this really make it very difficult to integrate national institutions like the military. They can often create a negative force that is very dangerous for the country and, of course, for our instruments of national power. And it becomes really important for us to, in essence, speak with one voice to condemn the violence and to also make sure that people understand that white supremacy has absolutely no place in the military or in any other organization. These kinds of acts can have a spillover effect, and military leaders, although they're not directly involved, have to be on their guard to prevent that from happening and poisoning the atmosphere in their units.
Now, sir, you've seen protests and difficult situations all over the world. In a situation like this, where we saw some violence last night, we knew there were going to be some 6,000 white supremacists and counter-protesters there today. Do you think law enforcement should have done more to prepare for this, or at least set up a barrier between the two groups?
Well, I think a barrier is always important. I've watched protests in places as far away as Bolivia and parts of Asia, seeing how people actually create environments where there are some really difficult situations. And one of the key things that law enforcement agencies have, which is very similar to the military, is an intelligence apparatus. They can use that intelligence apparatus to anticipate things. I think barriers between different protest groups are always important. Most law enforcement officials, I think, would agree with that. Part of it is also, of course, where you have the resources, and it becomes incumbent upon local officials and state officials to make sure that they have adequate resources to contain protests like this. Everybody has a right to protest, but the key thing is that it has to be peaceful, and property damage and damage to people in terms of injuries and God forbid deaths, that has to be prevented, and that's the primary job of law enforcement and now the National Guard in a situation like Charlottesville.
Colonel Cedric Layton, we thank you again for the time, sir.
You bet, Boris. Absolutely.
Our breaking news coverage of the clashes in Charlottesville, Virginia will continue in just a moment. Stay with us.